Okay, so this afternoon is a panel on the City Coalition and the data sharing activities we're doing. I'll try and share my screen. No, my screen has been blocked. Mark, I'm taking you off. I'm taking you away, Mark. Okay, because I can't share my screen if you're there. Is that okay, Mark? Okay, so this workshop is presented by the City Coalition of Digital Rights, and I think this has probably been presented previously in other workshops, but basically, it's a work group of the coalition focusing on data sharing projects and mainly the digital rights issues of data sharing. So nothing to do with technologies, not really to do with infrastructures, but more to do with how to protect, defend, and embed the protection of digital rights into data sharing projects, which are becoming more and more common and more frequent in among cities, between departments, or among departments in cities, and more between the private sector and the public sector, as the concept of big data and, more importantly, data-driven decision making is becoming more popular. So just to very briefly present the coalition. This was a network of cities set up in November 2018, founded by a group of Barcelona, Amsterdam, and New York City CTOs who saw that this was an important issue and put this on the table. And since then, the coalition has grown from the 3 original partners, city partners, to 55, I think, and we should be hitting 60 during October. And we're also supported by the UN Habitat, which is the part of the United Nations focusing on cities and citizens, by Eurocities, which is a group here. Daniel Sarasa is representing Eurocities, and he'll speak more about them later. But they're a European network of cities in the lobbying and the digital space. And by UCLG, which is an organization for the United Conference of Local Governments, defending and supporting local governments around the world. So we have we set up the coalition to aligned with human rights, and with this kind of famous expression that human rights offline should also be protected online. And therefore, in line with also United Nations declarations on internet rights, the idea is for cities to get together and share experiences and practices and share knowledge about how to embed, protect, defend digital rights in the digital services that they're providing to their citizens. And we often why cities. On a personal basis, I just think that cities are more efficient than any other public entity. I've worked both with governments and international organizations, and I can tell you cities are much more efficient. But also they're the closest to the citizens. So there they are, the first people involved in looking after citizens' rights, protecting communities. They're the first entities which are mostly concerned about increasing the welfare of the citizens. So they're in the best position for dealing with this issue. Now, as I said, we are 60 cities from north, south, east, and west, although mainly focused on Europe and the USA at the moment. We're steadily growing around the world. And it's great to have such a variety of backgrounds and people involved in this. The coalition got together around these principles which are a condensation of maybe 10 internet rights from the IDLP, from the principles of the United Nations, focusing on 5 principles of universal access and digital literacy, which is basically fighting against the digital divide. Privacy and data protection, very hot topic in Europe, but also becoming more and more common in other areas. Transparency, accountability, and non-discrimination. This is very much focused on looking at what artificial intelligence is doing and those algorithms, and how automated decision-making needs to be more transparent and explaining to citizens how decisions are being taken. The 4th element is about participation of citizens, so that digital services are not just built top-down by the cities thinking what's best for the citizens, but also bottom-up, citizens saying, this is what we need, or I think we need to do this. Okay, that's a very important concept of basically digital democracy. And the final one is regarding technologies and digital standards, is that the services can be open source technologies, open formats, so that they can be shared and audited. I go into a little bit of detail because we'll see that these principles come up over and over again in the case studies and the panel that we're going to be talking about. So I think it's very important to have these set. So half a year ago, we set up a data sharing working group because data sharing projects were more and more frequent, and the cities who are our stakeholders and members requested the coalition to pool resources and bring together ideas and recommendations about how to go about working on data sharing platforms and data sharing projects while respecting digital rights. So, we've been working together with many cities, many of them who are sitting here in the panel, on the panel. Basically, on a bottom-up approach, we've worked on collecting case studies about different projects that the cities are working on, and how they have met the challenge of defending, protecting digital rights, and identifying which ones are the key issues they have to deal with, and maybe bringing some solutions and sharing the lessons they have learned. So I won't say any more about that because that's what they're going to focus on later on. But the idea is that of the coalition is that we can share experience and publish resources, papers, best practices, guidelines, and these are made available on the coalition website and obviously among all city members. The issues we've looked at through the concept note and through working on those cases are here. That as you see, they're similar to the 5 principles of the coalition. So issues of privacy, issues of inclusiveness and bias, issues of transparency. And I won't go into the detail because you will see these in the case studies that are going to be presented. And the idea is, as I said, is to help cities who are thinking of or who are already working on data sharing projects to take a step back, to think a bit, and to use the resources that the coalition is sharing to be able to improve this aspect of defense and protection of digital rights in these projects. Okay, so today I said I'm just taking a step back. I'm just supporting Barcelona and helping the coalition. The star performers here are from our cities. I present them as we go along, but here we have an overview of who we have: from Daniel Sarasa from Zaragoza, Emily Royall from San Antonio, Texas, Johanna Pasilkar from Helsinki, Ron van der Laas, and I'm sorry about my Dutch pronunciation, from Amsterdam, Hamish from Toronto, Ben Lister from Rennes, Hector Dominguez, I can say that one quite well, from Portland, Ryan Kurtzman from Long Beach, and Mark from where I am in Barcelona. So you see, although it's actually all cities in the north, it's both from east, west, USA, Europe, where these case studies have come from. So without further ado, I will actually kick off on the cases, and starting with Daniel Sarasa from Sarasa. This should take about 40 minutes. Each one should have 3-4 minutes to present their case, and then we will have a round of questions, answers, debate in the last half hour, 40 minutes of this session. Daniel, are you ready? Hand it over to you.
I'm ready.
Okay, so there you go. Up to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Malcolm. Well, I'm here as I have a dual role in this presentation. I'm urban innovation planner at the city of Zaragoza. Zaragoza is a Spanish city, is fifth largest city in the northern part of Spain. A very historic city, and I'm also here as Eurocities chair of its data working group. And Eurocities, as Malcolm said, has been actively supporting the coalition, and our members have joined in group the coalition, and I think it's been a very, very interesting job, because at the same time that we were proposing, and Malcolm, you can go to the next slide, this declaration of citizen data, what we call the citizen data principles, the coalition was starting this data sharing group, and I think the two activities go in parallel. The citizen data principles are also a consequence of many years doing urban innovation projects, many of them with data, with hackathons, open data, dealing with smart city projects, and is an answer to some of the questions that all this work was rising. For example, we were not seeing at the time, and we're not seeing it now, that all these big data amassed in these data mining databases were creating a lot of public value in our cities. We were not seeing also that that this data was creating a lot of value for the common good. It was creating a lot of value for the digital platforms, of course, for the internet giants, for the big companies, but not so much for the people. We were not seeing also that the citizens were in the position of effectively owning this data and being empowered in the use of the data. There were many questions about protection of privacy, of course. Dark data silos are not transparent by themselves. And we were launching startup incubators, and if some business was successful or lucky enough to work on open data, then this business wouldn't work in another city. So there was a lot of lack of interoperability between data. And with interoperability goes also quality. There is a lot of differences in terms of quality when you go to one data portal to another. Then the question also was key when it came to data sharing. There are studies that say that if you link several records from different databases about the same person, even if those databases maintain anonymity, you can track, and you can, with a high percentage of probability, you can know who this person is. So we were wondering whether data sharing was really enough, or we should be sharing knowledge instead. There were more questions. There were the questions of, yeah, we want to make a more participatory smart city development, but how can we connect citizens to this data, to the power of data? It's clear that the consumers of data are the executives in the companies, technicians, but how about the plain citizens? If we are about to do more participatory democracies, somehow we need to show data in different formats. We need to lower the gap to understanding data. So if we go to the next slide. Yep. Okay. So we started to work on our in Zaragoza. This was what I talked about was the Declaration of Citizen Data Principles. That, by the way, the picture you were saying was in our Center for Arts and Technology, which is named Utopia, and in the William J. Mitchell Auditorium, and that's something that Emily will recognize from San Antonio. We were thinking at that time about how to ensure a certain amount of privacy, because you know that when your data is stored in a database, then your privacy is not 100% secured. So we started to build our own project, our own data sharing project, which is called the Periscope, El Periscopio in Spanish, and we started to fumble with differential privacy, a new concept that allows you to put as much noise as you want in data. So the data, so the system is not true for one individual, but it's true for a group of individuals. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, another thing that we worked on was on the starting on the starting point of this system, because this system wanted to create solutions, prototypes to improve the city, but we thought that answers were more important than questions. For us, a data sharing system should start with an agora or with a participatory body where citizens can ask the right questions, can discuss, can debate, and we did this by building this open urban lab in our center, in our city, and also by launching open challenges with no technology, leaving technology completely out of the table, in a program that is called 100 Ideas for Zaragoza, whose goal was to implement 100 ideas along several years, coming directly from citizens. We were feeling at the time that there is a big data divide that was being created, and the commons, the city halls, were at the wrong side of this divide, while the big companies, big internet companies, were at the other side of the divide. They were taking full advantages of data, but not citizens. Next slide, please. So another differential trait of our system was you can see we focus a lot on people. We established a very simple innovation cycle. The most important thing is to state the problem, use data to help frame the problem, add some objectivity to this subjectivity that urban innovation needs, and then use open innovation to come up with, through open challenges and the quadruple helix, to come up with prototypes that we can enhance and sustain over time. And this is, for example, how a network of private parking spots was launched. It was called Bici Sur, biking in the south. Next, please. Yeah, and finally, about the role of new labs, new innovation hubs, or the city halls as data connectors. This is the 600 square meter of Utopia Center for Arts and Technology digital facade. This is a LED facade where we can show the research. This is the pulse of the city, a research done by the universities, the local universities, using data from the city hall collected from traffic sensors that has been adapted by local artists to this great digital display. We're creating a new public realm, a digital public realm here. And this way, people from the city, from 1 kilometer distance, are about to see what's going on in terms of mobility in the city. They don't see everything, they don't understand everything, because it's not the goal, but they can start to ask questions about the mobility, to ask themselves some questions, to reflect a bit over what are the consequences of their mobility decisions. And it's a way of open up what's cooked inside the organizations or inside research centers. It's a way to open it up to citizens. And that's basically what I wanted to tell about our data sharing case, the Periscope in Zaragoza. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was very, very interesting to share with us. I'll hand over now to Emily from San Antonio, who is going to present her project on data sharing and questions of bias, and I think and then inclusiveness. Emily, over to you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Do you have the slide? Perfect. So for me, good morning, everyone. I am Emily Royall. I am a Smart City Coordinator at the Office of Innovation at the City of San Antonio. San Antonio is a rapidly growing city. We're the 7th largest city in the United States, and we are also a majority minority city, as 62% of our population is Latino. And we have quite a large indigenous population here as well. So we are a very diverse community. What I want to present briefly on today is a case study of a project that we just embarked on. It's a very interesting experimental exercise I want to propose to the group, but it's also somewhat simple and very bounded. So I think it makes for a good short discussion on the subject of bias in data-driven decision-making. Now, in our community, we certainly rely primarily on survey data as we conduct surveys with our residents to impact the services that we provide. We use that data to allocate services, to allocate funding for various programs, and to develop policy. These are really three of the ways that our city serves our residents primarily. And in light of much of the recent political environment that we find ourselves in the United States, we began to address the question of systemic bias in the data sets that we use. Now, that bias can be racial, it can be gender bias, it could be socioeconomic bias. And while there is a trend, which is very exciting, to address bias in algorithmic decision-making globally and certainly in the United States, we wanted to start with something much simpler, which is our primary vehicle of getting data at the city of San Antonio, which is through surveys. So what we did was we hosted what's called a community conversation. We had 3 discussions with our residents. They're all virtual. And they focused on really the 3 key areas in which our government interacts with citizens to obtain and collect data about them. The first being identity, so how our surveys are designed to collect data about residents. The second is reach, how surveys are administered and what barriers there are to participation among residents in our surveying. One is trust, how we ingest all of this data and use it to drive decision making and policy making as both institutions made of people, but also non-human actors, meaning artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision making. So that first concept that we talked about, identity, revealed quite a bit of interesting feedback from our residents. We learned, first of all, that many of the standards by which we used to design surveys were implicitly biased. We did not provide various categories by which people identify. We force people into certain buckets, such as race, force people to call themselves Latino, but not giving them the option to say mixed race, Latino or Black, Latino or Indigenous, for example. Same thing with gender. We force people to be in buckets of male or female. And of course, when we study that data, we're making critical decisions about behavior patterns in public health, for example, and tie those to specific demographics without actually acknowledging the bias in the ways we've set up those demographic categories in the first place. So we identified a number of recommendations from our residents in that one. In reach, the big challenge in our community that we learned by connecting with them was the digital divide. Especially in the post-COVID-19 environment, we're doing a lot of virtual and digital surveys. We host them online and we asked residents to participate online. However, we have learned that about 1 in 4 of our residents in the city of San Antonio don't have access to broadband internet at home, which means they have to go to a library or a public place to access the internet. And of course, during a pandemic, that is significantly more challenging than being able to access the internet online. So we had to acknowledge that there's a certain bias in how we collect data when we administer surveys online. Another thing that we learned is very interesting is we primarily rely in San Antonio on the networks of the people that we hire to administer surveys. So there's a issue there in bias where the people who are going out to administer surveys or administering them online are actively pinging their networks, their own set of people that they're connected to, rather than taking a more objective view of how we can reach a more general distribution of our population. And the last one, of course, is trust. And what we learned here is that much of the ways in which we communicate about how we're collecting data from our residents is really lacking giving them context for why. We have city staff who are basically throwing out surveys, but not really communicating to the public very clearly what the data is going to be used for, how it's going to be used, and whether or not the public has access to that data or any kind of report or outcome as a result of that. So again, a very simple and bounded view, but actually quite impactful, because now, as a result of this program, we have a very long list of community-driven recommendations for how we can reform this system and how we can really change and transform the way that the city of San Antonio and all of its 42 departments collect data about residents. We're hoping that we can take these recommendations and put them into policy, but also training for our different city departments so that they can actually develop and design surveys that really do allow for as unbiased as possible data collection about residents, which hopefully in turn will drive changes and reform in how we allocate programming and funding. So we're learning at the City of San Antonio that systemic change begins with the data that we collect from our residents in a variety of different formats. And hopefully through this work, we're able to address the bias that does occur in that fundamental foundation. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Very interesting. And in one slide, done. Thank you much. Handing over now to Johanna in Finland and Helsinki. Can you also present your project? If people have questions about these things, please do not hesitate to use the chat and post them to everybody who's listening to us. Please post. We can collect the questions and use them in the Q&A afterwards. Thanks. Johanna, over to you.
Yes, good early afternoon or evening as here in Helsinki. So I have to start with the classic. I hope you are able to hear me all right. Yes. So I'm presenting this project. I'm a senior IT project manager here at the City of Helsinki. And our project or our case study is a city, in this case Helsinki, as a MyData operator. Next slide, please. Okay, it's not, yeah, there we go. So a little bit of background of this project. Some work already been done here, but kind of you can say that we are in the beginning part of our journey of this case study. So actually in this venture, in this project, we have 4 fairly big cities in Finland. As you all know, Finland is 5 million people in total. So of course we cannot compare to the numbers of the citizens or residents in that sense. But anyhow, we have the greater Helsinki area. So we have the city of Helsinki, capital, Espoo city and Turku, and from north of Finland, the city of Oulu participating in this project. And one of the focus areas, or you could say the main focus areas, is to ensure how city as a MyData operator, or how the city in terms of the MyData can actually be sure that the residents' consent is genuine, and to really work on and find out that the residents, when they are giving their consent, they are giving it voluntarily, and they know the purpose and the scope of the data being used, where they are giving their consent. Yet we have another challenge there, because it should be exact enough then to satisfy both the legal needs and the practical desires of the use. And how we can actually make sure that all the users, data users, and all involved in this network actually can adhere to common ethics. So in this project, we are going to work through and we already started with the workshops, where we invite wide part of the society in this consultation, both the cities, our neighboring cities, or cities further away in the north, different actors within the city, so different departments within the cities to avoid the silos, as well as any NGO, or other potentially even commercial operators to discuss and form these kind of joint views, both to share, first of all, this MyData idea and MyData principles, and to then clarify and find out more about this consent-related topics and outcomes. So next slide, please. So overall, our aim, which is we are now, as I mentioned, at the part of this, in the beginning part of this journey, is then to reach to kind of a stage where we can offer these MyData enhanced solutions or solutions to really ease the daily life of the residents and collect the data consolidated within the cities, so there are no silos. We can overcome the silos, and we can find more unified ways of working and sharing, creating the services according to the MyData principles. Come to the specifics in terms of Finland, it is obvious that our legal environment, our laws are pretty strict about the consent. And what we have found out, and our current working hypothesis or our current findings is at the moment, is that, well, the laws are strict, but at the moment our city data protection officer has however said that under the current scenarios, if there is and when there is such a power imparity situation, if we are working with the MyData principles and coming from the MyData principles, in that sense, the consent given by the citizen is valid, even when we have the citizens' residents' rights and viewpoints versus the city or the city which is considered then in the powerful position. So this is our we can say small finding or small or quite big finding actually at the moment. And the project is ongoing. It is running till the end of next year, so November 2021. And I'm looking forward to contribute and discuss more with the colleagues here about our findings at the suite of the work. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johanna. That was also very enlightening. I think European cities share your concerns about consent, because obviously we're governed by the European regulation, which is common to all of us. So maybe we'll see this issue pop up again. Ron, I think it's time for Amsterdam, one of the founders of the coalition, to speak about the data sharing projects in Amsterdam. Over to you.
Thank you. Anybody can hear me? All right. First, personal introduction. I started working for Amsterdam in 2013, starting the Open Data program at that time. I worked a couple of years as a program manager of the program, and we opened up 750 data sets. None of the data sets had to do anything with privacy issues. But during already in 2013-14, we already talked about not even open data, but sharing data. So that's and data exchanges. So we already had a long time experience with that. And since 2016, I'm now program manager of the strategic alliances of the city, working together with the big tech companies like Google. Share with you. It's where we cooperate with Google and Waze and V-Mobile and so on. It's on what we do now is when we run the streets and the mobility of the city. We have all kinds of systems for opening tunnels or bridges and whatever. And what we do is we connect these systems to the internet, and we share the data. So the second we close a tunnel because there was an accident or something was happening, there's a data sent through an API. We send it to companies like Google, Waze, and V-Mobile, and we work together with them. And what we want is that the moment we close a tunnel, the navigation systems of these companies change their navigation, and they will not send anymore any cars in that direction because it gives a lot of stress because of the big piles of cars in the city. So what we do is we send this data through a national access point. I call it here National Road Traffic Database. In fact, not really a database, but that's the name. So in fact, it's a data exchange. And with this, the way we do that is we open up and we work together with these companies. And what we did is actually that these service providers really accept our data with and use it in their systems. And doing so, Amsterdam will be a pilot city for all other cities in Holland, and also regional and national road authorities to do the same thing as we do. So what we're doing is we're building a network of systems, and that the road authority is a trusted party for these service providers, for these navigation systems. And we will be able to have all cities, also the small cities, because we are very much aware of the fact that we're a big city, well, quite a big city. In Holland, we are a big city. And we are able to work together with these technology partners, but other cities are not. And Amsterdam, it's nice to be in a front seat, and we are connected to this navigation system. But we also like that all other cities, also the cities around us, are able to do the same thing, because it will also influence in a positive way the mobility in other cities, and that adds value also for Amsterdam. So what we do is, the first thing we did is we chose Google Maps because it was able to work with them and to have this data implemented. But now it's already also implemented at Waze, which is a sister organization of Google, of course. But now also B-Mobile is using the data, and we are working together now with TomTom and with Here and other navigation systems, so that we can we have level playing field with all navigation systems together. And the result of this is that the road users will, the traffic flow of the city will be optimal, and it will lead to less stress for the citizens, for the residents. There will be no necessary nuisance in the city or air pollution or whatever. And also it will give less stress to the road regulators, the people who work for the city, who try to change to regulate the road availability. And what we did is we did this with tunnel closures, but we also do it with road closures. So if there is a big event in the city, we do the same thing. We shut off streets, and we send this data immediately through navigation systems. We're working now on bridge opening. So if the bridge opens up, and we know it's going to be in the next, say, minute or so, we're already sending data, so the navigation system can change their navigations to that thing. And we're also working on roadworks. So we're working on real-time roadworks in the city. So we're measuring change patterns in the systems. And here you see what we're trying to do is building a network. Amsterdam is just one of the cities, but we also through this NDW, which is the national access point for road data, we're sending this data to the navigation system, which are on the right. And we asked this navigation system to send back us data through a data quality partner, which we are implementing at the moment, a national data quality partner, which will tell them what kind of data that we are sending you are you really applying. So this will have also influence on the quality of the data that the road authorities will be sending. That's my use case.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's just still a lot of work to do there. I can imagine working with these big platforms. Now I'd like to introduce Hamish from Toronto, who has a very interesting case because they've been working on a more policy framework in relation to data sharing. Hamish, over to you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, my name's Hamish Goodwin. Thanks again, Malcolm, for the introduction. I work for the City of Toronto in the Connected Community Smart City team. And for those of you who don't know, Toronto is the largest city in Canada. It's the 4th largest city in North America. The population is close to 3 million people. And in Toronto, about 30% of Canada's ICT jobs are located right here. You may have heard some news from Toronto in the news over the past year or so related to a proposal from Google Sidewalk Labs to start a smart city sort of proposal here in Toronto's waterfront. So I've had some involvement in that. But most of the work I've been doing in the past year is on the policy front around what we've called in Toronto the Digital Infrastructure Plan. So we took this proposal to council earlier this year, and it was well supported from council. Essentially, what it is at this point is 5 principles, which somewhat mirror the coalition cities principles related to equity and democracy and transparency and so on. And we got approval from City Council to, or direction, I should say, from City Council to apply those 5 principles to all digital infrastructure decision-making at the city. And so you can see the high-level principles on the slide there on the left. There's 5 of them. And so in application, we're in the early phases of that, but we do have some case studies around the public sector as well as the private sector. So I'll just kind of give you a bit of a highlight of some of the ways that that's taking effect right now. And data sharing is implicitly interwoven into many of these. So similar to some of the work Emily talked about, we have a data for equity strategy that's maybe not quite in the same place yet. It's we've got a report going to council in a couple of weeks, so that's exciting. And we have the DIP, the Digital Infrastructure Plan policies interwoven into that strategy. We also we're in the early phases of setting up a transportation innovation zone where companies or academics, not-for-profits would be able to trial any sort of innovative approach to transportation solutions in a real-world environment. So the DIP principles have been integrated into that process as well. Another big project I've been working on during the COVID period, the past 6 months, is trying to figure out a solution to provide broadband to many of our underserved and vulnerable residents. It's obviously a big undertaking, given the closure of many public places where those sorts of residents would typically access the internet, libraries and so on. So that's again another project where the DIP principles came to the front and really helped us advocate for resources and funding and so on. And I can talk a little bit more about these projects in the discussion period. I'm not going to get into them in too much detail. Finally, I'll just touch on some of the work that how we've been applying the DIP principles in the private sector. We currently have an RFP out at the moment. It was issued just a couple of weeks ago, or not even a couple of weeks ago, around the provision of a digital government platform. So that would be an online service or an app-based service, or both, that speak to each other, that provide a good customer experience for people to interact and do their online services with the city. And again, we integrated the DIP principles into that RFP process, into the evaluation itself. So the companies that submit an application or proposal for that RFP will be required to demonstrate as part of that application how their proposal complies with the principles. So I'll just leave it at that, and thank you, and hand it over to Malcolm for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamish. I'm dying to see how companies prove that they or show compliance with our principles, because that's one of the topics on our own agenda is accountability measurement, which is very important. Anyway, so moving on to Ben. Ben, are you in the room? Because I can't see you on the panel here in Rennes, in France. Ben, do you want to? Are you actually there? Can you speak directly? Daniel, you're disappearing. I'm sorry to say, your camera, you can hear, but you're not going to be visible anymore. Okay. Ben, request entrance again.
Hello.
Okay, you're on. Sorry about
Hello,
that.
can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, brilliant. Well, hi, thanks for having me. So I'm Ben Lister. I work for the city of Rennes in France. So it's the Brittany region's largest city. I'm open data manager for the communications department, which is why my slide is so drop dead gorgeous. And yeah, today I'm here to talk about our latest project, the Rudy project, which is Rennes Urban Data Interface. And so it's basically a data sharing platform. So the idea was 10 years ago, the city of Rennes started an open data project. And over the course of time, we kind of realized that our own data wasn't quite enough. It wasn't enough for us, for our own uses, and it wasn't explicit enough, or at least accessible enough, for everyday citizens to use. So 2 or 3 years ago, we decided we needed to expand our horizons, and we started a new project, which was financed by the country, by France. Called SPMD, so Service Public Métropolitain de la Donnée, which is basically the Metropolitan Public Data Service, if you will. So it was a governance project between quite a few partners, about a dozen, most public sector, some private sector. The idea was, could we organize data sharing on a local level? And after 2 years of discussions and studies, the answer was we needed the tools to be able to do this. We had tons of ideas, but we didn't quite know how to make it happen. And so Europe, through the Urban Innovative Actions Program, has financed this new project called Rudy. And I've just lost my screen. There we go. Sorry. So it's a 3-year project with 11 partners. Some of those partners are data producers. Most of those data producers are from the public sector. So we have transport, energy mostly. And we also have various partners who are there to facilitate different aspects of the project. So this platform, as we imagine it today, has 2 entry points. One entry point would be for the project manager, and one entry point would be for the citizen. And so the idea is, on one end of the platform, we would have, if I use a marketing term, B2B data sharing. So it goes beyond open data in the sense of we would be sharing data that can legally be shared, but under certain conditions. And for the citizen side of the platform, it's all about how can I take control, or how can I use my own personal data that's been collected either by the city or by its partners, and how can I access personalized services that are fully transparent in data usage, and how can I consent for my data to be used either for research or for private services. So the project goals for this are quite quite numerous, but also quite simple. So our first idea was to go beyond open data and push the limits on what we can share with others and what others can share with us. Because of course, you know, we have GDPR, but we also have, especially for certain partners, other restrictions when it comes to data sharing. We wanted to connect users and producers. What I didn't mention is I work for the communications department, and or maybe I did mention it, but anyway, the point was we wanted to take a use case approach and not necessarily a technical approach. And what we've noticed is often data producers don't know quite what is expected of them from the end users, and end users don't quite know what goes on a producer standpoint. So we wanted to make something that would close the gap between the two. And obviously, for us to be able to close the gap, we needed to encourage residents of the city to participate in, firstly, how this platform would be built, how it functions, who governs it, how it's governed. We would get to a point where the citizens would directly participate in the platform's governance. And at the same time, we would essentially start a series of programs which would help local residents pretty much learn about data, learn about use cases, learn about why it's important to care about these kind of subjects. Obviously, COVID has kind of thrown that off a bit, but we're still trying to make it work. And so all in all, this is all to come to one end point, which would be to include as many people as possible in decision making on a local level. And that's it for me, really. Thank you for inviting me, and I'll leave my spot for the next person.
Thanks, Ben. That's very interesting. There's some crossover links with the My Data project in Helsinki and people looking after the data and things like that. So that's really interesting. Next on the list is Hector from Portland. So he has a very interesting project on racial justice, and I'm looking forward to listening to this because I haven't listened on.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone, and good afternoon, good morning. Yeah, and my pleasure. Yes, this. So I really appreciate all the inputs, and I'm learning a lot so far. What we are doing in Portland, and for everybody to understand that the city is currently going through a number of crises, one after the other. So of course we have the COVID-19 like public health global emergency. But also there is this very pervasive issues around race and discrimination, issues around also derived from the crisis, the public health crisis, or on creating an economic crisis as well, and impacting particularly those who have been disenfranchised historically in this country. And in addition to that, we have all the political context, of course, here in the US. We have all the ongoing protests around the Black Lives Movement. In the city, we have more than 100 continuous days of protest where our law enforcement police bureau is being heavily involved. And unfortunately, we have a number of issues around trust back and forth between government functions and communities. We also just had some extreme right-wing demonstrations coming from outer state to the city just yesterday, for instance. And on top of that, a couple of weeks ago, we had huge fires that burned millions of acres of precious forests. And we had the worst air quality in the world for about a week. So nobody could actually, not only because of COVID-19, but because of the air outside, nobody could really leave their homes. And everybody is adjusting with the work-life situation, the school, the home. Anyway, so within that, so we decided to step back a little bit from technology and try to start thinking more about the foundations of why we are doing all that. And that's why we're having like this approach from racial justice. And as you can see, the circle is, the city has just released some core values that includes being anti-racist. Next, please. Thank you. Well, after COVID-19, we started, so that was so far away, like in March. So we started these different digital actions that included open data sharing, trusted surveillance, privacy, and digital inclusion as a main priorities for our program, Smart Cities program. And then you can see in the top right a map, so highlighting areas where vulnerability of displacement actually are present. And you can see the blue portions, neighborhoods in the city. Those were actually yellow 5 years ago. And now they are completely gentrified. They have completely displaced a number of families, mostly African-American families from those neighborhoods. And these things keeps evolving. And now it just expanded to other neighborhoods. And the city is actually concerned about that. And that's one of the uses of data, is allowing us the evolution of that and also kind of supporting some of the policies, particularly within the context that I just mentioned. So the regional barometer is something that is including not only the city of Portland, but other cities around. Both is a combination between urban and rural areas and community organizations. So it's a quite comprehensive effort triggered by COVID-19, and the goal for that is try to get all the information available for what is needed, basically, either COVID-19 response, economic recovery, or whatever. And then finally, the city has just passed a ban, 2 bans actually, for use of face recognition technologies for public use and private use in public places, basically recognizing that the technology is has some issues around bias, particularly against Black and brown people, women, and older people as well. And with that in context, also including all the privacy issues around collecting information, biometric data, basically, that is considered sensitive, with not much of a privacy protection here in our state, for instance. So the city had actually taken that very blunt measure of banning a technology, and which is actually something that we are not planning to do for everything. It's just, we see it as a strategy just to create a wake-up call to industry and to the community to start recognizing these as a high priority issues for the city. Next, please. So finally, when the city last year, 2019, we developed these privacy principles as a way to start a context of a framework, basically, in which we can actually look data, given the lack of some of these more modern privacy frameworks here in our state. So that was an effort of the city trying to create something to start with. So within that, now we're going to start working on the concept of digital justice. With the face recognition policies, we had the opportunity now, we created a new city code title, which is kind of the city constitution on digital justice. Now we are we're going to start some work around defining digital justice within the context of anti-racism. You know, particularly, you need to understand that the relationship of, particularly between government and Black and Native American communities is historically not good, of course. We have going through different exercises, connecting, for instance, some of those, the way in which surveillance has been evolved here, connecting that with the slavery and tracking enslaved or free enslaved people here, and has been really evolved and be very pervasive in how it's been used in law enforcement. Now, with the concept of digital justice, what we want now to do is also try to rethink digital rights. So we understand that the list that the coalition actually is using is fundamental, but perhaps one of the issues that we see is that considers everyone equal and with equal access to those rights. And we don't see that in practice. We see that as some people actually have that equal access, while others, particularly those who have been historically marginalized, those who are not considered citizens here, are actually not having access to those rights. So we're going to rethink what those rights might look like in the context of digital justice. And with that, we are going to start doing more work on reimagining surveillance, reimagining data sharing, reimagining technology as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hector. I hope you're coming out of these crises, which it seems to be one on top of the other. Poor Portland. Moving on now to Long Beach, a little bit south, and to Ryan. Ryan, are you with us? Yep, you're here. Yes. And some idea of your projects. Thank you very much for coming.
Great. Thanks for having me. Can everybody hear me? Great.
Yeah, you're pretty regular.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's about 8 o'clock here in the morning. Great. And I'm excited to be here. But just for some context, Long Beach is a city in Southern California. We have a population of about 500,000 people. We're just south of the city of Los Angeles. Like Portland and San Antonio, Long Beach is a very diverse community. We actually have the largest Cambodian population outside of Cambodia. And I'm sure many of you may have heard of the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is a set of privacy regulations that governs private companies here in California. So in the city of Long Beach, we're taking cues from that regulation to really inform our data privacy policies at the city. So what I want to talk to you about today is how we're incorporating principles of data privacy and data governance in the development of our Smart City initiative. In Long Beach, we already had very strong internal city data sharing policies that we've used for a number of our programs. But what we're seeking to do now is to really bring those out to our community so we can really democratize the use of data in our city. And the first step in doing so is to really understand what our residents feel comfortable with when it comes to data sharing and data privacy, and to really also assess their general data literacy. So I'm going to discuss some of those principles today that we did to learn more about our residents' comfort with data privacy. So Long Beach introduced our Smart City initiative in 2019, and we've in fact taken many cues from colleagues in this room here and other best practices from cities in California and in the United States. And above all, our Smart City initiative focuses on resident involvement in the collection of data and also in data governance. So in order to design our Smart City initiative, we actually surveyed our community. We've gotten about 500 to 600 responses so far. It's still kind of in progress to learn about our residents' preferences on data privacy and smart cities. And specifically, we asked about some of those trade-offs between the efficiencies gained by smart city technology and potential impacts on data privacy, as well as what the role of the community should be. So on the screen, you'll see some of the initial mapping we've done of both the positive and negative associations with smart cities. Obviously, our residents do believe that smart cities can improve efficiency, solve social challenges, improve personal convenience. But on the flip side, there are many negative associations, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So there's obviously already a lot of distrust in local government. So our residents fear that smart cities and new technology could exacerbate those feelings of distrust that already exist. And then one of the biggest negative associations is around data privacy and data privacy violations. So we found our residents are very concerned about violations in data from hackers, from third parties, and even from government itself. So it's been very important for us to make sure that we're including the community in the design and development of our data privacy and data governance policies. So in our survey, we also asked residents several kind of scenarios about how they would feel comfortable with the city and the government using their data. For example, we would present a scenario about their comfort level with using personal information that we collect when they log on for free Wi-Fi to perhaps advertise city parks programs they might be suitable for. Another example is if we use their transit pass app information to give them tips on riding transit or driving less. So we asked them what rights they cared about most. And again, we took some cues from the California Consumer Privacy Act. So we asked about their comfort and their desire to opt into data collection, to opt out, to view data, to correct data, delete data, download data, preferences on whether their data should be anonymized and aggregated, and also their ability to weigh in to the city on how the data is used. And so far, we found that the top choices are the ability to opt out, to view data, and also that their data is aggregated and anonymized. So we're going to be using this input from the community to make sure that we're designing both our policies and our channels for community engagement with their preferences and beliefs in mind. And in the next couple of months, we're actually going to be kicking off a community steering committee, which we hope will really be this formal channel where we can work with the community to design our data governance policies, but also to solicit ideas for smart city challenges and smart city solutions to address some of the most pressing needs that we have. But at the core of this is really the engagement with our community and asking them what they feel comfortable with sharing. I think so often we assume a certain level of digital literacy or even data literacy about how their data is used. But what we're finding is that our communities really care about some of the basics as it comes to data privacy. And that is really anonymization and the ability to view data and opt out. So that's all I really wanted to share. And thanks again for the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think Mark is at the gate here to come back in again. So I'm dropping you and come back later, okay? Mark, if you can hear us, you should be able to get back on again now for our last presentation regarding my hometown, Barcelona. Not where I was born, but certainly where I'm living now. Mark, are you here? Hello, Mark. You're in. Okay.
I'm in. So can you hear me?
I've got you. Yeah, sorry about that slight delay there. Okay, I've got you. So yes, Mark.
Okay.
Mark from Barcelona, and can you present what we're doing here?
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm, for my presentation. So I'm Marc Perez from the Barcelona City Council innovation team regarding IT. What I want to share with you today is how we try to involve, let's say, not usual suspects in the use of open data. So basically, I want to present 3 different actions that we started in 2018. The 3 of them are based on challenges, but well, we try to just think about how we can make those challenges a little bit different of typical ones. So one of the challenges that I want to present is the World Data Visualization Challenge that we perform with Kobe, a city in Japan, where the idea is to explore this kind of city-to-city learning in order to, let's say, use open data sets of different cities by the others. So basically, Barcelona teams use cities, so use that open data sets of Kobe, and Kobe use open data sets from Barcelona, and they try to find different solutions to specific challenges that are changing in every edition. So this way we explore how different, let's say, target groups that are not used to the data sets of the city, a specific city, can use it in another way. So it's kind of trying to innovate on the use of these open data sets. Another thing that another challenge that we perform is what we call the Barcelona Open Data Challenge, that it's targeting the youth, people between 15 and 16 years old. So we go to the schools, mainly public schools, but not only public, and try to present the open data sets and the open data portal of the city of Barcelona. And then they have to perform teams, and with these teams they need to search to find one social challenge that is happening in the neighborhood, and solve it, or trying to give a solution to this specific challenge by using the open data portal. So this way we are engaging young people of the city to use this kind of open data sets and to show which is the potential of using this kind of open information in order to promote the portal, but also to promote the philosophy that it's in behind. So then we have also the city turn, which is also let's say a challenge to solve challenges, but in this case we involve research and development communities and also startups. So this kind of theathons now is in the context of the EIT Urban Mobility, and for example in the edition of 2020 we're more focused on solving COVID-19 related issues that came up using this emergency. So basically, this is how in Barcelona we are trying to, making this kind of data sharing with communities that are not always involved in this kind of processes. So this is all from our side.
Thank you very much, Mark. So it's a broad spectrum of different things you're doing with data. We'll see. Okay, well, thanks very much for this input to this part of this session. What I'd like to do now is to open the floor first to a small talk among the panelists, but also for those of you who are listening to us. Please don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat or ask to participate, and I can actually let you on board. I have a question, as I'm not a city administrator, so I have a question. If I can take advantage of my position as moderator, you're obviously kind of in projects which are multifaceted, with loads of dimensions, and multi-stakeholder, so loads of people and different interests. The question is, how easy is it to identify the rights issues that are involved in a project, or will be, and how easy or difficult is it to actually respond to that and deal with those issues, both in terms of governance and in terms of design? So it's a bit of a wide question, but I think it boils down to how easy or difficult do you find your job today in for ensuring that digital rights are taken into account. Do go ahead, just speak up, those who've got the speech, and if you want to talk, I'll let you in.
Well, it's Johanna here. If I start with something simple.
Thank you.
So excellent question, actually, and it's something we've been discussing a lot with the project in the early phases of the design. So obviously, I guess there are as many ways as the projects, but what we are doing in our project is that simply following stakeholder analysis. So just analyzing our stakeholders in a broad sense, whether they are in the government, different ministries, different cities who have worked already on this topic before, and interviewing them listing them a little bit, and then we are exactly getting to that question that how far or in what depth we should go into the certain question. In this case, for example, our topic is the consent. If we are talking with our government partners, they are of course looking at the state level things, the national level things. And when we are talking with other cities, our project partner cities, they are coming from very, one could say, kind of operational, practical, resident-oriented views, and they have very practical use cases and scenarios and situations to solve. So I guess what we can say on behalf of the Helsinki side is that we've identified that yes, we cannot solve it all at the one go, but we try to pick and select some certain focus areas and find the right flying altitude in those to take them as the output of the project. And of course, we are much interested in inviting other international operators and actors in this field to join us and talk to us and connect to us as well.
Thank you. Anybody else up for the question?
I have some insight as well. Speaking from the American perspective, we are in a little bit of a wild west in the United States when it comes to federal regulation around digital rights and data privacy protections, and even more so in Texas, which is where I'm operating in, and the state legislature is not exactly friendly to municipal governments. So that's an interesting area to work in, but I found, practically speaking, that in a vacuum of policy, most of our influence on digital rights comes in the negotiation with private sector companies on specific projects in partnership with other agencies. So for example, we've been working with our energy utility for a smart streetlight project, and we've been in a procurement process for the last year or so in negotiation with major telecom companies. And we've been able to influence the culture of our energy utility by pushing very strongly that the city and the utility own the data that's generated from the project. Because the reality is that these telecom companies have very stringent rules about data ownership in the contracts that we're negotiating. And we found that we often are able to leverage the visibility of the project and the project itself against that one particular tenant or clause in the agreement of data ownership. So that's a small way to wield influence, but I think as we encounter these situations more and more, and as capacity is built in local government to recognize how some of these contracts function, we're in a better position to influence those contracts and change them. And I'm hoping that aggregated over time, that will bring the city and the agencies that we work with to develop a culture and a policy around digital rights in the United States.
Thank you. Are other cities finding there's a difference between the way they treat the data that's generated by the city, which obviously they have more control over? And I see that Philip Sheldrakes raised the big issue of ownership and control. But do you find there's a difference in practice between managing data that's coming from the private sector through public contracts and data that's generated directly by the government? I'm thinking maybe in Long Beach, when you talk about the data from working with citizens, is that data that you collect, data that's coming from utilities? What does that make any difference in how you approach project?
It's a good question, and I would just add on to what Emily said too. I think it's really important that when we're designing our data privacy and data governance policies, that we're really designing at the margins and thinking about making sure that we're getting the perspective and voices of communities that aren't traditionally represented in government. The survey example that I shared earlier, we got about 500 to 600 responses, but we found that about 60% of them were actually identified as white, whereas only 30% is actually white. So I think in Long Beach, we're seeing an overrepresentation of voices that are typically already represented in local government and have access and channels to influencing decisions. So that's an issue, I think, in its own. And I think in terms of managing data, our largest challenge now is really capacity. I think, like Emily mentioned, we're working on developing more standard procedures and guidelines that we can weave into our purchasing and procurement that give the city greater ability and access to data. But only in the last few years have we really started to understand as an organization even the value of having access to that data and of data itself. So I think we're starting to prioritize data collection from vendors and third parties. In terms of city-owned and city-produced data, you know, I think that government still sees itself as this public good, that the service that doesn't necessarily feel the need to use data to provide better services or necessarily aggregate to pitch. So I think we're not even, I think we're just starting to grapple how to use data that we produce internally to drive better decision making and improve operations. And I haven't really seen much of a distinction between the data that we produce and the data that's provided by the private sector.
Okay.
Speaking from a mid-sized city, about 500,000 again, so it's really different for everybody.
Okay. Any other comments regarding this difficulty of actually identifying issues? Because I noticed that Emily said that a little bit sometimes surprised about the bias, and again, Ryan's just said that it's I mean, I'm seeing this when I'm working with Barcelona in that getting people, city operators and private companies, utilities who are working for the city, less operative and more conceptual about digital rights is very difficult. It's kind of like a mental change, which is going to need quite a lot of a push. Do you think that's a correct statement?
Some cases it's building policy.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Emily first, then Hamish.
Okay. I think in some cases the policy making is reactive. In some cases, cities are building their own technology, and so we're learning, how to regulate that internally. In the cases where we buy technology, we're constantly solicited with new types of technologies and just a new leading edge of where we need to apply digital rights or formulate digital rights principles. Unfortunately, in my context, the way that the procurement process is set up is very much to preserve the fairness of the bidding process for vendors that participate. And as a result of that, we have to set all of our conditions up front in the document, which means that we have to, ahead of, seeing the responses to the RFP, set up exactly how we want them to comply with digital rights. And in some cases, the way that we've conceived of those rights and how we want to articulate those may not match an emerging technology or a new technology that's implementing an algorithm in a new way, for example. So there is a little bit of a gap there, I think, between the knowledge cities have around how to create those principles and apply them in procurement, and then the innovation that's ongoing in the technology center sector.
Okay, thanks. Hamish, though, you've got a policy framework. Is that useful for informing projects in how to take this into account?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, firstly, I would definitely agree with what Emily said about policy being reactive. We have a policy framework because we had a huge amount of concern amongst the community and elected officials around the smart city proposals that were in Toronto and still are in Toronto. So I guess we're fortunate in that sense that fear and concern kind of helped us move the bar on the policy front. But at the same time, there's still a lot more work to be done where we'd like to be spending our attention on but it's being pushed and pulled in different directions because of that reactive context or that reactive environment that we work in municipal government. I just wanted to also pick up on something that I think Ryan mentioned about silos, and I can sort of agree with that or sympathize with that context as well. I mean, Toronto's a much bigger city, but with that comes a much bigger bureaucracy, and so just fundamentally data sharing. For us, the starting point with that is to break down those silos and use the data that we have to make those quality of life improvements or better resource management. It's very fundamental and sounds very obvious, but that's one of the challenges that I think is probably pretty common amongst all the speakers, really.
Yeah. No further comments. Otherwise, I have some more questions. I'm a lawyer. I've always got questions. I do have a question. Is another one then? So, looking at the way you've looked at these 8 or 9 projects, do you think you're seeing a form of process that could be abstracted and made a little bit more general as a form of practice or recommendation in how to approach this question of digital rights in data sharing? Or are we still very much at the green early stages where each project is very, very different and each one has to be taken on its own characteristics? I suppose this is work for the coalition, is to do this, to help people get these general views.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I can start off just very quickly. Firstly, I would say being a member of the coalition has been extremely helpful and advantageous to us as a city. So if any members or non-members out there listening in are wondering about whether or not to join, I would certainly encourage you doing so. And in terms of the challenges, I think one thing that's been really exciting for me, my background's in urban planning, and I'm fairly new to the technology sort of sector. But now that I'm in it and we're doing consultation, I think community consultation is I think probably one of those common things that is important across all of the projects that was discussed today. And that's new, certainly for my municipality within the technology sector. Which is exciting. And, we did community consultations just recently, and some people came to our consultations that had never been to any community consultations in their whole life. So that's cool. But it's also a challenge because I think it's probably fair to say that the majority of, a lot of citizens or residents generally, firstly, it's hard to engage them. Secondly, it's particularly hard, from my experience, to engage them on this issue. And thirdly, those that do end up coming, it's hard to communicate the complexity in a public meeting forum. And again, I imagine be interested to hear from the other panelists if those are some challenges that you've also experienced.
Yeah, I would like to add in terms of that community participation. We are very aware, for instance, that some of the challenges that Barcelona and Madrid have had with the participatory democracy tools that they already have, where there is ideas and sometimes thousands of people submitting ideas. How do you manage all that? For instance, how do you get like a meaningful engagement of all that? And then usually is specific sectors that are participating. What happened to the blind spots on that, right? We have tried to reach out some of the specific communities at the edges of our cities, for instance, particularly trying to reach out migrant families from a Muslim, Middle Eastern background, displaced families from other neighborhoods, African-American families or Native American families, and we have failed. Honestly, we have failed to reach out some of those communities and get get them engaged. We have some ideas from the city perspective of why we have failed. Part of that goes along the lines that people are more concerned of the day-to-day issues in their lives, you know, trying to find a job, try to think about how to pay the rent, and so on. But also, it's the understanding of the different issues, right? It's not easy to, not even for us or people within the city, to start grasping the impacts of artificial intelligence, of emergent technology that not even the creators of the technology fully understand, right? So, and among all that, doing that with limited resources.
Yeah, so yeah, here in Barcelona we have a lot of experience tackling the challenge of involving all citizens in participatory processes. In fact, we have a participatory budget, which is I don't know now the amount of money that it's put in there, but it's quite a lot compared with the whole budget that we have. The idea, so the first idea that we've got is to develop this open source platform, which is called Decidim. We decide in English. I think Helsinki, they are using also it. And well, in Lyon and other cities that they are using it. But well, here, for example, just to have an idea of who is using this platform. Here in Barcelona, we have 1.5 million inhabitants in the city itself, not in the metropolitan area, which has 3.5, but in the city, it's more or less 1.5, 1.6 million. And nowadays, active users in the platform, it's around 40,000 people. So yeah, this is one of the main, let's say, problems that we have by using this kind of digital tools. So we move to perform some kind of hybrid meetings, let's say, or participatory meetings with this kind of target groups that are not really involved for, let's say, many different reasons. So this way we mixed a little bit these 40,000 people that it's always there, okay, and with other other people that it's not that easy to involve them in order to minimize especially the bias that you have in this kind of decisions. So you put their money and just say, okay, just decide. You are not getting you know, the general opinion of all the city, just only for those that are actively participating. So if you want more information, I can put you in contact with the participatory department, which is really aware of that.
It seems we need to collect more data about data, metadata on the data itself, to have the quality control of. And one of the comments, I think, from Philip or Stenrik in the chat is the value of metadata attached to how data is collected, where it's collected, and how it's generated, which I think makes life even more complex. But maybe it's what we need to have this layer of quality in terms of digital rights.
Yeah, I was about to mention that, like, now that the quality is a super big issue as well, and complicated actually to add in our data pipelines. We've seen here in the US a lot of misinformation trends, which is one of the big social challenges that we have right now.
Yes, yes, I can see. Okay, I have a question for Hamish, and this is my own one. You said that you're trying to embed this question of complying with the principles in your public contracts. Do you have is it very kind of like sui generis, let's see how it goes type of approach, or have you found some criteria that you would like to use as a more objective way of measuring this compliance? Because that's one of the big questions we've been asked for the last 2 years. Is it's all very well to talk about digital rights, but and to say we comply, we don't comply, but how do you actually measure that compliance?
Great question, Malcolm. So we, as I mentioned in the presentation, we're in the early stages of embedding the principles into procurement, and so we just have one example right now, which is currently out. So it hasn't closed yet. But the way we did it, we don't really have any specific criteria, primarily because our digital infrastructure plan isn't detailed enough yet to get there. So I mentioned in the presentation we have 5 principles, and accompanying those principles are vision statements. So the way we worked that into the RFP was to ask the proponent to demonstrate in their submission how they comply with those vision statements. So we turned the vision statements into questions for the proponents to address, and it remains to be seen what the results are. We don't know yet.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, in a European perspective, I think we certainly have strong privacy regulations. So it's maybe one of the criteria, which is privacy respect, compliance, is maybe more objective in this side of the Atlantic. Also Canada as well. Canada has a strong privacy regime. But I think very much more difficult in terms of transparency, accountability of AI, and that type of thing.
Yeah, and interoperability and so on. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you. More questions. I've been guiding this discussion. We've got people on the floor. Vladimir, would you like to ask your question? He's saying that the benefits of the My Data. Do you want to ask to join the panel and make your question? Vladimir, are you with us? No, seem to have lost us. He says, can cities, the My Data project, there's supposed to be, Vladimir, there's a button normally saying request to speak. Though I don't say no, I can ask your question for the people and then see how it goes, okay? It's up on the screen. He's contrasting this privacy balance between taking private data to be able to provide personalized public services, and how do you measure the benefits of this and the efficiency of this? Is that right, Vladimir? In terms of respect for rights, balancing this privacy versus efficiency or optimization of services for citizens. Johanna, maybe you can comment on this.
Yes, I can. I'm reading, Vladimir, your comment there, and thanks for commenting. I will surely take it from this session. And yeah, that's a quite interesting point. For example, this kind of like having your library data and getting some personalized services such as recommendations for the other events, not just the reading materials, but some events that on your leisure time might be interesting to you. Certainly, I think that's something we will be looking in our project, maybe not in the first initial stages, but that is something we have been discussing, and we are keeping our eyes on that as a future upcoming stages. So yeah, sure, but that can be one part of the services, getting something personalized, for example, giving a consent for your citizen data, getting then recommendations of your sports facilities if you move to other location within the city, or even if you move to other location within other cities. So you could take your, let's say, leisure time, your hobbies data with you and get the recommendations of the municipal facilities, swimming halls or libraries or sports facilities that are then personalized to you. But yeah, you mentioned their taxation, and it's a kind of something that comes up with the Nordic countries maybe. But yeah, I don't know if it can have any impact on your taxation part. That is for the tax authorities.
Thank you. I still find it's a very difficult to find that because it's quite strange that sometimes we're quite happy to share our data with the private sector with different recommendation engines that are, although they're probably not so personal as your tax information, your health information, but and the cities are finding it maybe more difficult to collect data to provide personalized public services. So and unbiased ones as well, which is the difficult issue here. Another issue, actually, I think was very interesting, raised Philip and was discussing it on in the chat, was this question of ownership and control. Certainly, I, as a lawyer, looking at this, and I'm helping Barcelona City draft standard contract terms dealing with data in public contracts. We're coming up with a very the classic scenario, or the classic way of approaching this is, if I own something, I control it, and therefore I can leverage it for the benefit of society or for the benefit of my company. The classic scenario here is whether if a utility or a private company is contracted to provide a service, who owns the data coming out of that public contract? And certainly from the Barcelona's point of view, we may actually get rid of the concept of ownership and say, well, Barcelona controls that data. We may share that data with the ongoing use of the data with the private company, but we also have a public duty to share that data with other private entities so that they can also participate on a level playing field. So there's this balance between ownership and maybe dropping the concept of ownership. Certainly personal data can't be owned, but can be controlled. Is that something that you see as a lever in your projects and the public at large? This concept of being able to actually determine what happens to data as a key element so it's not just data collection, which is one of the big issues we're talking about today, and community participation in deciding what to do with the data. Here I'm talking about the city as a guardian or as a fiduciary entity for looking after that data. Is that a concept that's useful for leveraging data and maximizing the protection that the citizens deserve for this data? It's not a good question on the panel when you get complete silence.
Well, I could comment on that. We have actually a number of challenges regarding being a good data steward, obviously. So I'm going to bring the example of mobility data. So the city is providing a number of permits for micromobility scooters companies, like going around the city, and just by regulation, by mandate. So scooter companies, they need to allow the city to look into their data in order to make sure that they comply with the levels of service on different parts of the city. Also, they need to the city needs to make sure that they follow instructions in terms of where they can park the scooters. The scooters move not on sidewalks, but they move just on designated spaces and so on. And that comes into concerns from the companies because of all the our public records laws, basically. So given that companies are sharing where their devices are, like like all scooters, and having other companies, the ability to have access to that may actually represent some competition, extra competition for them, and actually even expose some intellectual property value that companies own. That has been always an issue of contentious issue with them. So how do we do that in a way that we follow everything? Like we create transparency. We also make sure the companies follow the law, basically, and the levels of services the service that we are intending in the city. And we are coming up with a number of different strategies, and that's just as an example, of these challenges in general.
I just wanted to add to that too. I think that's a great question. I'll try to be quick, but to add on to what Hector said, in California, there's a big fight playing out in the state legislature about cities' access to mobility and e-scooter data, and whether companies like Bird and Lime, the scooter companies, they don't feel like they have a right. They don't feel like they should have to share these basically private information about origin and destination of where these trips are taking place. Whereas governments are arguing that as governments, as stewards of the public, they have the right to manage mobility data to provide better outcomes for residents. So there aren't really any answers yet, but I think it's interesting, and I've seen a trend of governments wanting to be take more of this data steward role. But the question that raises for me in Long Beach and just generally too is what is our capacity to even be a good data steward? This is a role that government is typically equipped to do. I don't think this is a role we've envisioned ourselves to do. So I think we need to bolster our data literacy in our infrastructure as well, in data warehouses, and thinking about if we're really going to take on data as a service in local government. One thing the city of Long Beach is contemplating is very early stages, but we're thinking about what if we, as a requirement for our contracts with companies collecting data, we require them to post the data to a data marketplace or some sort of data warehouse. We haven't even introduced that idea yet to some of these private sector companies. I think they would probably scoff at it because they see data as a very valuable asset to them. But it is an interesting idea and taking a further step to democratizing the public collection of data.
Thank you. Yes, I think Daniel's trying to get on. Who can I drop? Emily, can I drop you off for a while to let Daniel onto the panel?
Yeah, that's fine.
Daniel, can you get back on again now? Anyway, just while Daniel's logging on, I see as a key issue. I'm sorry, putting my lawyer hat on again. There's a huge difference between someone who's an owner who thinks, oh, it's my data, then maybe I'll do something with it, to a trustee, to a fiduciary person who has obligations to do and to look after this so-called property, and therefore is no longer just free to do what they want, but actually has obligations to, as you say, curate, steward, look after, and make available to the public. Daniel, you're on, so you can come. You're up. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Well, about this conflict that you were speaking about, the fact and the paradox that we are willing to allow companies that have their headquarters abroad to treat our data, and we're more reluctant to do so in our with our city halls. And I think that that is good that we have a city coalition here, because we can't, and that's something that we also were talking to the European Commission about, giving a more prominent role to cities when it comes to data sharing, because city halls are the closest administrations to citizens, and sometimes it's an impossible dream to exert your rights of cancellation, access, etc., about your data when with one of these companies. But it's more easy. It's easier to do that with your city hall. And at the end of the day, if you're not getting good responses online, you can go and ask for a personal visit with a public servant. I mean, everything is registered. So I cannot express how even if many people have the sense that city halls are like a little spy. In fact, we should convince not only our administratees, but also the European Commission that we are the institutions best placed to exert this role of data stewards.
Anybody want to answer that one? Ron, you've been working with the public sector as well, this interface between public-private data. Your experience has been pretty good, obviously, maybe on objective data about traffic. Have you found are there any other areas where it's been a bit more difficult to build a good partnership with the private sector on data sharing?
Yeah, we have a couple of experience in that field. I've been listening to what you've been sharing. A lot of talking was about personal data, and let me add something to the discussion from my experience. I don't know if it's Amsterdam, if it's a overview of all Amsterdam, but I know that when you talk about data, maybe even privacy data, when it's concerned the procurement of activities, Amsterdam loves to keep more and more in focus that as soon as we give out processes to other companies, private companies, we're putting in the contract that we own the data. So they can do the process, but we own the data, and they can use our data in their processes. That's one thing. The other thing is, like, when we try to share data with private companies, we don't like to have privacy of data that is has privacy issues. So when we share data with companies, we always like to have aggregated data, because then we don't come in this situation that there might be privacy issues. So that's a split one another, and then your question on problems we have with the companies getting data. There's one issue, maybe something that we can put together as a city together. Is like when we are working on COVID, we wanted to have data that's interesting about the public domain, like how busy are our streets, because we have to take care of our city, and we need to know how busy our streets are. And there's two ways to do that. One is to put all city with technology and find out how busy it is, and then the citizens will see us as a big brother. We don't want that, so we don't want to put all kind of technology into the city cameras or whatever when it's not needed. But there are companies who actually know how busy our streets are. Right? Like when you look at Google Maps, they have popular times data, and we have a good cooperation with Google in many ways, but they don't want to share this data with us, and we need it. We need it absolutely, because we need to go to the places where it's packed, and we should put our city police in those situations. So maybe we could make a nice group of interesting cities and go together to Google and say, hey, we want to have a popular times data, and don't use the argument of privacy, because there's no privacy issues, whatever. It says the public domain, so the streets and the squares of our city, and we want to know real time how busy it is.
And are you having any success there?
Not at the moment, not yet. It's we know it's a issue for the top of Google, but that's why I think it would be nice if all cities in the world would say it's not a question of one or two cities. All cities needs to have this data. So if we could use the city of the Coalition of Digital Rights to get to this kind of companies to say, hey, we want to have data which has no privacy issues, and we need it to manage our city.
Yeah, I think, Ron, I think the question is you're proposing here an alliance of cities in front of these companies regarding data, and I think it's useful to for us cities to be heard as a voice at the Commission also, or at the state level, because taking this to an extreme, I mean, all these companies have built their businesses, their digital platforms, etc., with urban data and with data that is collected in cities, and it's a kind of kind of colonization, right? Because they're extract the big mines are in cities for their businesses, but apart from services to individuals, they're doing very little for the common good. They don't even pay taxes here, so so it's kind of frustrating. And I think that we need the help of the states in this discussion. I mean, at some point, for example, with the case of Uber is very clear. Many cities have managed, big cities, to get deals with Uber to share traffic. But this is an effort that is costly, and that some cities are successful with, and other cities don't even have somebody to talk to at Uber. Okay, so we can't even begin the conversation. So at some point, one can imagine a scenario where a company cannot operate in a city, because I don't mind whether it's a public contract managing the buses or the transport of a city, or somebody that launched a platform that everybody uses. I mean, it's a public service. So in order to operate in a city, you need to comply with certain things, and we all agree that data has the potential to create a lot of value for the commons. Then this should be maybe on the equation.
I agree with you, but I want to add one thing that you say, like you said we need our national authority to join this discussion. I know by personal experience that these kind of companies, they take cities much more serious than the national authority, because we are much more practical. And these kind of cities always say, we don't want to talk, we just want to do it. And that's why we are in the best position to ask them and show them what it will bring to us and what kind of other alternatives we have. And the other alternatives are less nice than the alternative that they can bring.
Okay, thank you. We're just closing up now because it's 6 o'clock. I just want to have, if we allowed 20 seconds each, to say, what do you think is the key issue in the next 3-6 months on this subject? Starting with randomly, Johanna, what do you think? What for you in your project? What's the key issues going to be?
Well, yeah, it will be revolving around the consent and how we can, both on the policy level and on the technical level, ensure that it is really given in the genuine and understanding manner by the resident.
Okay, meaningful consent. Hamish?
In addition to that, I think just building on the community-driven emphasis that I think has been a theme of today's discussion.
Okay, community democracy in data management. Mark from Barcelona.
Yeah. In addition to how to involve these kind of non-digital communities that are also important in order to avoid the bias when we are gathering data.
Okay, that's it. Avoiding bias in data collection. Ron?
I would say it's something like cooperation. Try to negotiate, bring data, get data, work together, cities together, but also together with the private sector.
Co-collaboration with the private sector. Daniel in Zaragoza?
I would suggest that we start turning data-driven government into informed people-driven government. So that would be my point.
Oh, that's a bit more tricky, that one is. Okay, I'll write that one down, and I'll think about it, and I'll share some ideas on the network. Okay, Ryan at Long Beach, what do you think? Most important key factor.
Dropped it in the chat, but I think to build on what the other panelists are saying, I think it's going to be about really operationalizing these principles, these policies, and these ideas. It's one thing to advocate for digital justice and rights in theory and in principle, and another thing to do it in a scalable way that works for a variety of city projects. So I'm excited to see kind of how different cities are able to operationalize these ideas moving forward.
Okay, and Hector? Avoiding the smoke?
Yeah, avoiding the smoke, of course. But no, I think there is a great alignment. Everything that Ryan just said. Yeah.
Okay, so making more operational. That's true. I'm just wrapping up here. This is what the coalition is about. It's about sharing and looking for some common actions and best principles on this. Okay, so I'm doing a plug for those cities who are listening to us. Please come and join us, as was mentioned. The more we are, the better views we have about things, the more issues we'll spot, and the more we can share these things. Okay, so just to wrap up, thank you ever so much for the panelists. Emily has had to leave, but I'll send her a private email saying thank you very much. Thank you for the public and those, especially those who've been chatting on the chat. Okay, please visit us on citiesfordigitalright.org. We have a new website coming up next week, and there is space for you to participate and provide ideas. And for cities who are keen on joining, just click the button, say join the coalition, or send an email. And we're happy to have you with us. Okay, thank you ever so much again. Okay, and maybe see you tomorrow. I think the NGI is continuing tomorrow with some great sessions on other subjects. Okay, good evening or good day to everybody, and thank you very much.